still kind of in this same funk that you've been in for so long. You keep going back through these cycles, and we leave off with the people asking, who's the man who will begin to fight against the sons of Ammon? He shall become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So they leave off with this idea of who's going to come and protect us against this group of people, this tribe of people, this nation that is oppressing us. And we find that answer to that kind of early on here in chapter 11, but it's kind of a strange journey to get to him actually delivering them. So Judges chapter 11, we're going to start in verse 1. It says, now Jephthah the Gileadite was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot. He was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot. So there's nothing that he's done. He's described as a valiant warrior. It's one that you would look and go, hey, this is the one that we'd want to lead these people. They just asked the question, hey, who's going to lead us against the sons of Ammon? Who's going to do that? The very next verse, we're introduced to someone that is a valiant warrior, but his mom has a background. He said he was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot. And Gilead was the father of Jephthah. So his dad is Gilead, which most of us would assume and believe that is the one that would be the father of this group of people, because he was a Gileadite. So he would be the father of these people. So it would make sense that he would lead his own people in this. But he came out basically with a scarlet letter here. He came out with a mark already on him because of who his mother was. And verse 2 says, Gilead's wife bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, we can assume that that's not the same person. Jephthah's mom and Gilead's wife are not the same person here. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, you shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. And worthless fellows gathered themselves about Jephthah, and they went out with him. So we find the introduction to Jephthah here as he was a valiant warrior. So it seems like he'd be a really good pick for the person to lead them against the sons of Ammon. You would think, okay, well, hey, this guy is a highly qualified candidate with the wrong background. Now, it's not mistakes that he made. Now, if it was something different where Scripture started to indicate, hey, this is something that he did and this is what disqualified him, we know those things happen. They still happen today. There's consequences that we've talked about for the things that we do wrong, consequences of sin, consequences of our choices. But he's not made this choice. He was born into the family that he had. He was run out of that home. It assumes that we can assume from what we see here in these first few verses that he was raised by his father up until the point where his brothers, half-brothers, ran him out of the home because they didn't want him to share in the inheritance of his father. Although he was his father's son, they didn't want him to share in that. And so they ran him out because he was the child of another woman. And so it seems like we get the answer to the question from verse 18 almost right away, but it takes a strange journey to get to the place where we're going to be by the end of this chapter. And so for me, one of the key things to note is that he's described as exactly what they're looking for, but mistakes that were made by somebody else, his own father, the lifestyle that his mom had lived. We don't know why any of that is there. That's not spelled out for us. But the choices that his father made and who his mom was led him to being pushed out, run out of his home by his brothers. so he couldn't have any inheritance. And as I was reading through commentaries and stuff, one of them described Jephthah's existence in this moment. He was now without a home. He was now without a family. And if you didn't have those, you didn't have a future. In that culture, if you ran away from home, if you were pushed out of that, home was everything. Home was where it was, and that's why it was a big deal for Abraham to leave home and go and follow God, because he was creating a new journey. Kind of what you were born into is that path that you walked more times than not in that culture. And so he was run out of his home. He had no identity now. He had no inheritance. So really he had nothing. He was kicked out. We don't know what happened to his mom. We don't know where she's at. There's nothing mentioned there besides the lifestyle that she lived when he was born. So we don't know any of those details, but we know that Jephthah was, because of where he was, he had no home, he had no family that we know of. So therefore, he didn't have a future in this moment. And so he tags along with some people that are probably not so great, but he builds himself a reputation. We'll find that out in verse 4. And this kind of feels similar there with the type of people that he gathered around. Kind of takes us back to Abimelech's story and the people that he hired to fulfill his conspiracy over in Judges chapter 9. The same wording, worthless fellows, is used here in chapter 11 that was used in chapter 9. So, but that's where Jephthah's at now. A valiant warrior, doesn't have a home, doesn't have a family because they've kicked him out, doesn't really have a future. Until you get into verse 4, and it says this: it came about after a while that the sons of Ammon fought against Israel. War now breaks out. War breaks out. Sons of Ammon have been kind of oppressing them, and now there's fights and stuff that are happening. The sons of Ammon have risen up to fight against Israel. And when the sons of Ammon fought against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. They didn't ask questions. They didn't say, well, who's going to save us now? They've already had that question over here in verse 18 of chapter 10 of who's going to lead us against these people. They didn't ask anything. They just sent, the leaders sent for Jephthah because he had a reputation that was already described to us in verse 1, but is seen just as much here as the leaders look and go, you got to go get him. If we're going to fight this battle, if we're going to be in the midst of this war, what you've got to do is you've got to go get the valiant warrior. So apparently he still has a reputation, although he's been run away from home. And nobody seemed to have any issues with that. Nobody complained about that. No, the leadership of the town didn't disagree with it. They were probably all in cahoots with it and said, hey, let's get him out of here. You're right. He's not a legitimate child of your father. So yeah, remove him from the house, remove him from that, because we don't want him to be our leader until it gets to the point that he's the only one that can fight that battle. So his reputation kind of precedes him as the first thing that they do. They're not asking questions. They're not searching the crowds of people. They say, go get Jephthah from the land of Tob. So go get him. We need him because we can't do this without him. And verse 6 says, and they said to Jephthah, come and be our chief that we may fight against the sons of Ammon. Now, some people look at the wording there with that word chief and say, okay, well, they weren't really giving him full kingship. Like a lot of times when it was one of those, they found the one that they needed to fight this battle. They say, hey, whatever you ask, you can have that. We just need you to come do this. No, they send for him specifically, and they're like, hey, won't you come be our chief? And some of the commentaries that I read, they kind of pointed to this fact that they were okay with him being a military type leader, but they still didn't really want him to lead the people. There was still some of that angst from what the dad had done and how Jephthah came into the world, that they didn't really want to release full rule and reign with him. But they said, hey, why don't you come be chief over the people? Why don't you come just so we can fight against the sons of Ammon? Come lead our troops is really all they were asking for in this moment. Verse 7, then Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, said, did you not hate me and drive me from my father's house? He said, wait just a minute. I got some questions. Aren't you the same people that kicked me out of my home? Aren't you the same people that when my brothers complained about me sharing inheritance, and some of his brothers may have been some of the leaders here. It's not exactly clear there. But we do see that the leaders were involved in him getting sent out of town. He says, excuse me, but didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Am I not the same person that you asked to leave and you ran me out of town, and now that you need something, you're coming back to me? Now that you have no other choice, your last resort and the only hope that you have is the one that you ran out of town. Be honest with you, I think many of us would ask a very similar question to that as well. Of, excuse me, what? You want me to do what now? You want me to come and lead the people, fight a battle for you? Why? That's no longer my home. He essentially lost everything. He will lose everything by the end of this chapter. Spoiler alert there, but he essentially lost his home because these people kicked him out. Because his brothers didn't want him to have inheritance that was rightfully his because he was his father's son. He says, so why have you come to me now when you are in trouble? You didn't want me when things were good. Why do you want me now? I read through that verse and I'm grateful that this is not a description of God's character. This is a description of Jephthah's character. Probably would be a description of the majority of our characters, honestly. I think a lot of us would look, if we're honest with ourselves, we'd look at this and go, you know what, I'm going to be the same way. Why do you want me when you're in trouble, but you didn't want me before? But I am grateful that that's not who God is. That God doesn't look at us and ask those same questions. Josh, why do you want me now that you're in trouble, but you didn't want me on the mountaintop? You didn't want me when things were going well. You didn't want me on that downhill slope that was easy in life. You didn't want me when things were good and there were no issues. You're only wanting me now that there is trouble. But as I read through that, I was reminded not only that I would probably react a lot like Jephthah does here, but how often do we do that with God? How often do we only run to him when there's trouble? And see, the thing is, God's okay with us going to him when there is trouble, but he also wants to celebrate the good things. He wants to celebrate the good times. He wants to have a home in us to be able to say, I want to be there for all the highs and the lows. And so for us, we've got to be careful that we don't try to kick him out when the times are good and only run when there is trouble.
That reminds us of 911. All the churches were full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2 weeks later, they were empty again.
That's right. Yeah. It was harder to find a seat in the church house in 2001 after 9/11. Because people know where they need to go in trouble, oftentimes. And we want people to come when there's trouble, but we want them to fall in love with Jesus and stay even in the good times. And we got to be careful to do that too. That we fall in love with him enough that we invite him to the birthday parties too, not just to the doctor's office. We invite him on our vacations and not just those low moments where it feels like dark and alone, but we take him with us wherever we go. Verse 8 says this, it says, the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, for this reason we have now returned to you, that you may go with us and fight with the sons of Ammon and become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So the wording changes a little bit. They're not asking to be chief anymore. They're starting to relax a little bit, and they said, hey, we need your help. Will you come and fight the sons of Ammon with us, and we'll make you head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head? He's starting to try and make sure that he understands the rules that they're trying to lay out here. He says, if I go back, and an interesting thing here, we don't know what his relationship with God was. He may have served multiple gods, but he at least understood who the God of Israel was, because he does bring him into this conversation. So that is good to note here in verse 9. But he says, if you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head? He said, so if God gives us this victory, will I rule over the people? Is that what you're telling me? In verse 10, the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, says, the Lord is witness between us. Surely we will do as you have said. They gave their word. But these are also people that have hurt Jephthah in the past. So while they gave their word, look what it says in verse 11. It says, then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and chief over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. And so there was almost a ceremony here, a covenantal ceremony type swearing in of leadership change here. He wanted to make sure that that was done. He wanted to make sure that they couldn't go back on their word, because these people have already ran him out of town. They've already taken his home away from him. And he said, you're telling me that this is what it is. You're going to put me in as your ruler if this is what God does through this. And they said, yes. And said, you've got our word for it. Said, okay, but I need a little more structure to this. And so they go into that point, and there's almost a ceremony type thing, a covenantal agreement between the people himself and God, because he says he spoke these words before the Lord at Mizpah. Now we continue on with the journey here, and it jumps in from that point all the way into verse 12. It all automatically just shifts that narrative there. So this has all happened, and he steps in, jumps right in as how do I fix this problem? How do we go about this? And he takes a very diplomatic approach here in verse 12. And it says, now Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the sons of Ammon, saying, what is between you and me that you have come to me to fight against my land? So he takes this approach of, hey, what did we do to make you mad? Why are you trying to fight against us? Why are you coming to this area to fight with these people? What have we done to cause this type of fight? And so he's not just going, hey, all right, guys, you got me here to lead this army. Let's draw our swords and let's go into battle. He takes a very diplomatic approach and says, hey, can we figure these things out through conversation? Can we talk about it and see what happens through this? Verse 13, the king of the sons of Ammon said to the messengers of Jephthah, because Israel took away my land when they came up from Egypt, from the Arnon as far as the Jabbok and the Jordan, therefore return them peaceably now. He asked the question, what's the reason we're here? It was a land dispute. Now, the king of the sons of Ammon spell out some boundaries that are present in their journey from Egypt, and we'll see him talk about that here in just a moment. But at that time, the sons of Ammon did not rule the lands that he is talking about. That was ruled by different groups of people. They were close to those boundaries, but that was not their land. And it's been a long time since they made that journey. But that's what this fight is all about. They say, hey, we want our land back that we think is rightfully ours. Verse 14, he continues on, but Jephthah sent messengers again to the king of the sons of Ammon, and they said to him, thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the sons of Ammon, for when they came up from Egypt and Israel went when they came up from Egypt, and Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh, then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, "Please let us pass through your land." But the king of Edom would not listen. And they also sent to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. So he's walking them through that timeline. He sent his people back and he said, walk them through the timeline of what happened when the nation of Israel came out of Egypt. He said, every time we came up to a place that was owned by other people, we asked for permission to pass through the land. Not to settle the land, not to take the land. We asked for permission to allow us to pass through. And when they didn't give permission, they didn't move. That's essentially what he's told us so far in all of this. Verse 18 says, "Then they went through the wilderness and around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, and came to the east side of the land of Moab, and they camped beyond the Arnon." That's the first place that he talked about. It says, "But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the border of Moab." So we got to this place you were talking about, but we didn't come in because we had already not been given consent to come through the land, so we didn't do anything. And Israel sent messengers in verse 19 to Sihon, king of the Amorites, the king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, "Please let us pass through your land to our place." But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory, so Sihon gathered all his people, encamped in Jahaz, and fought with Israel. So instead of letting them come through, there was a battle that took place. He came to fight with the Israelites. Verse 21 says, "The Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel possessed all the land of the Amorites, the inhabitants of that country." So they possessed all the territory of the Amorites, from the Arnon as far as the Jabbok, and from the wilderness as far as the Jordan. So God gave us the victory, and in the victory he also gave us the land as part of that. And that was understood in that culture. That's not one of those that it's just an assumption that was made. If you defeated your enemy, then you owned their territory. That was part of their culture there. And he pulled God into this because it was God who fought this battle. And he's about to pull their gods into this because it was understood that if your God gave you the victory, if your God was stronger than the God of the other people, you would prevail in battle, you would win that, and now you would own that piece of territory. And so everything that was described, they walked through the history of how they got to that place, and then how God delivered the people in that moment and gave them that land. Verse 23 says, "Since now the Lord, the God of Israel, drove out the Amorites from before his people Israel, are you then to possess it?" He said, since God drove those people out, isn't that God's land? Isn't that God's territory, since he's the one who cleared that land? He defeated the Amorites. Wouldn't that be his? Verse 24 says, "Do you not possess what Chemosh, your God, gives you to possess? So whatever the Lord our God has driven out before us, we will possess it." He said, don't you do the same thing. If your God, Chemosh, gives you a land, gives you victory, don't you take it as your own? So we're going to do the same thing. So he's bringing in those cultural norms into this conversation and saying, why would we not do the same thing? And verse 25 says, "Now are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever strive with Israel, or did he ever fight against them?" It says, "While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and in all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon, 300 years, why did you not recover them within that time?" He said, we've possessed this land for 300 years. Why are you saying it's yours now? Why are you saying that this land is ours, so we're coming to take it? The reality of it is that was not the truth. Jephthah knew that because they knew the culture, they knew the history of Israel and the journey that God had brought them and how long they had possessed the land. So for 300 years it sat outside of their control. And so he said, why would you not have recovered it within that time? In verse 27 it says, I therefore have not sinned against you, but you are doing me wrong by making war against me. May the Lord the judge today between the sons of Israel and the sons of Ammon. But the king of the sons of Ammon disregarded the message which Jephthah sent him. So Jephthah tried to. He tried to make peace with it. He tried to be a diplomat. He tried to do this in a way that would not cause conflict, that would handle this in a, hey, if we can talk about it and figure out why in the world you're trying to attack us, let's have this conversation. Had the conversation. They told him, hey, this is what it was that you've done wrong. Says, this is what we feel like, this is our land, so we've come to take our land. He said, no, this isn't your land, because this is how we came to possess this land. So this is still our land. He said, why didn't you try to get it in the last 300 years? We've owned it for several centuries now. Why would you not have come to get it back then? He said, I've not done anything wrong to you. You're doing something wrong to me by trying to make war against me, and we're going to let God judge this. We're going to let God decide what it is that's there. And the king of the sons of Ammon disregarded the message, and he didn't listen to him. That wasn't what he wanted to hear, although it was accurate, although it was right. That's not what he wanted to hear. And so what happens next is war continues on. There was no diplomatic solution. There was no opportunity to get past that. The thing that we need to focus on here, the thing that we need to make sure that we understand is there in verse 27, he said, may the Lord, the judge today between the sons of Israel and the sons of Ammon. He said, God is going to decide who gets the victory. I say that we got to focus on that. We've got to see that because of what happens here in verse 29. Jephthah makes a mistake. He opens his mouth when he doesn't have to. And he makes a vow to God that's going to cost him dearly. So let's see what it says here in verse 29. Now the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. God's presence is with him. Remember in the Old Testament, it would rest on people for a time and then he would pull it back. And so when the judges came in, the ones that God had put in place, when they came in to rule the area, God would put his Spirit upon them. He would place his presence on them, and then they would do incredible things for the Lord. He does that here with Jephthah and says, so that he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, then he passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he went on to the sons of Ammon. He was able to go through, he was able to rally the troops. War was coming, it was not going to be avoidable, and so he's looking and says, hey, we're going to go and fight this battle. All these people are there, but then verse 30 happens, and Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. He didn't ask him for it. God didn't say, hey, what are you going to do? God didn't ask for anything in this. He's already placed his Spirit on him. But Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Jephthah wanted to make sure that victory would be his. And so he made a deal with God when God didn't ask for a deal.
After all the things that God had done for him, he still didn't quite trust him.
Yeah.
He's got to bargain a little harder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And one of the things that I was reading about, what do you expect to be the first thing to come out of the doors of your house to meet you when you return? Some type of family. This one's going to be his child, and he only has one. This is not one of those where, because it doesn't say that the door of the house is open and the dog's going to greet him because the dog's happy to see him. There's an understanding here that the vow he was making was the vow of a human sacrifice. because the animals would not have been running out the door. Now, there's some confusion on his part, and this is why we don't fully know what all he worshiped. We do know that he did worship the God of Israel, but he may have been polytheistic instead of monotheistic, meaning he had many gods instead of just one God. We don't know that for sure, but we do know that if he was a worshiper of just God, then he would have known that God did not like human sacrifices. And you may say, well, what did he do with Jesus? That was God that did that one. He requested one other time of a human sacrifice, and that was Abraham and Isaac. And he didn't go through with it. He was looking for Abraham's obedience. And so you read through a lot of scripture, and if you're going to sacrifice something to God of your own accord, he did not want it to be a person. That was not what God wanted. And yet when you read through that, those verses there, it says, shall be that whatever comes out of the doors there in verse 31 of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Before we go into the rest of the story there, the thing that we've got to take note of and the thing that we need to remember is that God is not asking for us to make deals with him. He is not asking for some type of extreme vow of us to look and go, hey, Lord, if you'll do this, then I'll do this. It's one of those things that's exactly what he's doing here is if you'll deliver them and I can return in peace, victorious, then I will give you whatever runs out that door of my house. God never once asked him to make a deal with him. He never once asked him to make a vow. He just said, go. God was going to make a way. And he had already said over in verse 27 that the Lord, the judge, would judge today between the sons of Israel and the sons of Ammon. He was already alluding to the fact that God was in control of the outcome of all of this. But he wanted to make sure that victory would be his. So he thought, if I bargain with God, then that will assure me of the victory. Sometimes we bargain with God and we lose things that he never intended for us to lose.
Amen.
God doesn't want our vows. He wants our life. And you look and go, well, I'd rather give a vow. No, he wants us to say, God, here, use me. God, here I am. Take me. Not, hey, God, if you'll do all of this, I'll give up this one thing over here. He just wants us to be obedient. He wants us to open up all the doors and the windows of our house and let him come in and fill that and fill that space with us and then just be able to use us out of that. But oftentimes we get in the same mode as Jephthah here and we say, well, if I can bargain with God, if I'll tell him what I want to do with all of this, then maybe he'll let me have it. If I show him my plans and my intentions, if maybe he'll give me that victory if I offer him something else. What does God need? He doesn't need anything from us, but he loves us and he wants a relationship. That's the only thing he desires, is a relationship that's obedient to him. But Jephthah says, I'll give you whatever runs out that door as a burnt offering. Verse 32, so Jephthah crossed over to the sons of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. I almost wish he had lost the battle. He struck them with a very great slaughter from Aroer to the entrance of Maneth, 20 cities, and as far as Abel Keramim. So the sons of Ammon were subdued before the sons of Israel. 20 cities they captured in this. onslaught is what it was. I mean, God gave them a victory, a massive victory. It's described as a very great slaughter. 20 cities that they captured. In verse 34 says, when Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, behold, his daughter was coming out to meet him with tambourines and with dancing. Now she was his one and only child. Besides her, he had no son or daughter.
You know, it was something, Brother Josh. He was made an orphan. He was put out, and then his daughter, he made to be a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's a difference here in the two places that we see human sacrifices besides Jesus giving his life on our behalf, where a father and a child is there, and Abraham and Isaac leads to Isaac being spared and Abraham being the father of many. In this one, you have Jephthah making a vow with God, because see, God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. It wasn't the other way around. Abraham didn't look and go, hey, you gave me one, but I want thousands. I want to be the father of all of the nation of Israel. I want to be the father of all of your people, so I will give you my son on that behalf. No, he said, I want to see how real you are about following me. Go sacrifice your one and only son. So God had made that request for Abraham and Isaac. And on the flip side, Jephthah said, hey, if you'll give me victory, whatever comes through those doors on my way home, you can have it. One, sacrifice or ask of a sacrifice led to Abraham being the father of many, while the other one left Jephthah with no children at all, having to sacrifice his one and only child. Because he made a vow with God that God didn't ask for, that God did not require. And verse 35 says, when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot take it back. He said, I vowed to God that I would do this, and I've got to keep my word. But I want you to see her response in verse 36. So she said to him, my father, you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me as you have said, since the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the sons of Ammon. She said, God gave you the victory, Dad. God gave you the victory. And so you've got to keep your end of the bargain. So do what it is that God has asked, that you said you would do to God. And she said to her father in verse 37, says, let this thing be done for me. Let me alone 2 months that I may go to the mountains and weep because of my virginity, I and my companions. Then he said, go. So he sent her away for 2 months, and she left with her companions and wept on the mountains because of her virginity. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did to her according to the vow which he had made. And she had no relations with a man. Thus it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went yearly to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in the year. So she is remembered, although Jephthah is left with no family. Once again, he was run out by the leaders of this town, who would later on come back and say, hey, we need you because you're a valiant warrior. And then he would make a vow that would cost him, from what we know, really the only thing that he had left. It cost him his daughter, his one and only child. And so his legacy would not carry on. He would wipe his family from, his lineage from ever moving forward, because he made a vow with God that God did not request. Just a reminder that God's not asking us for extreme promises. He's just looking for obedience. He's looking for a willing heart. He's looking for someone that's willing to say, yes, Lord, I may not understand, but I will go. Yes, God, I will have that conversation with those people. Yes, Lord, I will spend time praying for them. Yes, Lord, I will do this thing that you're asking me to do. I will go, I will stay, I will do whatever it is. Yes, Lord, I am willing. That's what he's asking for. He's not looking for us to go, hey, if you'll do this in my life, I promise to give up this. That's not how God operates. Because at some point in time, you may actually get the victory and it may cost you more than you're really willing to give up. Jephthah wanted to make sure that he got the victory. And I think if you could have asked him there at the end of verse 34, I think he'd rather had defeat. Because, the nation of Israel would have a little bit of rest because they defeated the sons of Ammon. But Jephthah would not have any because it cost him his daughter. It cost him something that it should not have. God wanted to provide the victory for Jephthah because he was going to do it anyways. And Jephthah knew that over in verse 27. He knew that God had that ability, but he didn't fully trust it. And the thing is, what I believe God still desires for us today is I still believe that he desires for us to have victory in our lives. Does that mean we're going to win everything? No. But I think he desires good things for us. He desires good things to happen to his people. And then he gives us good things because he wants us to share that with other people and pass on that goodness of God that he gives to us. He wants to provide that victory in our lives, but we're simply asked just to trust him and follow his steps along the way. He doesn't need your vows. He doesn't need your word. He needs your willingness. He needs your obedience. And that'll be enough. And if he needs you to get rid of something, he'll tell you that. If he needs you to trim something out of your life, he'll show you that. But until he asks for it, he doesn't desire for us to make some crazy promises just to speed up what God's already trying to do. He just wants us to be willing. Any questions before we turn our time and attention to the prayer and praise list for this evening? If not, I want to give you some updates.